Title: Queen Anne's War. The Struggle for North America, 1702 to 1713. Chapter 1. The War Begins. The year was 1702, and the cold winds of war once again blew across the vast, untamed wilderness of North America. The dense forests whispered with uncertainty, the rivers ran with an uneasy stillness, and the colonial settlements, scattered along the eastern seaboard, braced for yet another storm of violence. War had come before. King William's War had left scars upon the land, but now a new and even more ferocious conflict was about to unfold, one that would determine the fate of empires and the future of the New World. This conflict, known to history as Queen Anne's War, was not an isolated struggle. It was merely one part of a far greater and more complex web of hostilities, a global confrontation between the great European powers. Across the Atlantic, in the courts of kings and the halls of war councils, the War of the Spanish Succession had erupted, setting England, the Dutch Republic, and their allies against France and Spain in a battle over who would control the Spanish throne. While dukes and generals clashed on the battlefields of Europe, North America became an extension of their ambitions, a vast theater where colonial militias, professional soldiers, and indigenous nations were drawn into a brutal war for survival, dominance, and revenge. For the English colonists living in the fragile settlements of New England, New York, and the Carolinas, war was no distant affair. It was an immediate and terrifying reality. They lived on the edge of an untamed world, where thick forests and winding rivers concealed dangers at every turn. To the north, the French settlements in Canada, New France, stood as a constant threat, their alliances with powerful Native American confederacies, such as the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Mohawk, making them a formidable force. From the south, Spanish-controlled Florida and its network of fortified missions posed a threat to the expanding English colonies of the Carolinas, where the English had cultivated their own alliances with the Cherokee and Yamasee. This war was not just about the European powers, it was also a struggle for dominance among the indigenous nations of North America. The Iroquois Confederacy, once a dominant force, found itself caught in the deadly crossfire between the French and English. The various Algonquian-speaking tribes of the North, many of whom had long allied with the French, saw the conflict as an opportunity to push back against English expansion. For these native nations, Queen Anne's War was not about distant kings or dynastic claims. It was about defending their lands, seizing new opportunities, and ensuring their survival in an ever-changing world. The war would be fought not on open fields with neatly organized armies, but in the shadows of the wilderness, in the silent approach of a raiding party at dawn, in the sudden crack of musket fire from behind the trees, in the screams of settlers as their homes were burned to the ground. The rivers, once lifelines for trade and travel, became pathways of destruction, carrying war parties deep into enemy territory. Fortified towns became besieged strongholds, their walls offering little comfort against the relentless attacks that could come at any moment. And so, in 1702, the first shots of Queen Anne's War rang out, setting into motion more than a decade of brutal conflict that would reshape the political and cultural landscape of North America. No one, settlers, soldiers, or native warriors, would emerge unscathed. Among them was Jonathan Mercer, a seasoned English frontiersman living in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. At 63 years old, Jonathan had survived the bloodshed of King William's War, but he knew this new war would be even deadlier. The French and their native allies, primarily the Wabanaki Confederacy and Mohawk warriors, were preparing to raid English settlements. The Spanish, meanwhile, were threatening the southern frontier, clashing with the English in the Carolinas. As Jonathan sat by the fire in his modest home, sharpening his musket, he thought of the coming storm. He had seen friends fall in past wars. This time, he would not wait for death to come to his door. He would fight. Chapter 2. The Battle for the South. Far to the south, in the contested lands of Florida and South Carolina, another battle brewed. The Spanish in St. Augustine had long been a thorn in the side of the English settlers in Charlestown, modern-day Charleston. In 1702, Governor James Moore led an ambitious expedition to destroy Spanish power in Florida. Accompanying him was Elias Carter, an English scout in his late 50s, whose knowledge of the swampy terrain made him invaluable. Under Moore's orders, the English launched a siege on St. Augustine, bombarding the city's stone fortress, Castillo de San Marcos. The Spanish defenders, along with local Timucua warriors, fought bravely, repelling wave after wave of assaults. Elias and his men managed to breach the outer defenses, but Spanish reinforcements from Havana arrived just in time. The English, outmatched, were forced to retreat back to Carolina, leaving the fortress standing. The failure of this attack did not deter the English, but it was a reminder that their Spanish foes would not fall easily. Over the next years, constant raids, skirmishes, and border conflicts defined the region, making life uncertain for settlers on both sides. Chapter 3. The French Raids on New England. Back in the north, Jonathan Mercer was preparing for war. The French, led by Jacques Tester de Montigny, were planning a massive raid against English settlements in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Their native allies, the Abenaki warriors, were known for their brutal efficiency in battle. On a frigid night in 1704, the town of Deerfield, Massachusetts, was attacked. Fire illuminated the dark sky as French soldiers and Abenaki warriors swarmed the village, slashing through defenses. Jonathan, stationed at a nearby outpost, heard the gunfire and rushed to the town's aid. By the time he arrived, Deerfield was in flames. The town's survivors, including women and children, had been taken captive, bound in ropes, and marched northward toward New France. Among them was Nathaniel, Jonathan's nephew, a young man barely past 20. Jonathan swore to bring him back, no matter the cost. As the war continued, more raids devastated settlements along the northern frontier. Entire families disappeared overnight, either killed or taken as hostages. The settlers had no choice but to fight or flee deeper into the colonies. Many believed the French and their native allies sought to wipe out English influence in the region entirely, a fear that only grew with each new attack. Chapter 4. The Struggle for Port Royal. As the war raged on, the English sought revenge. In 1710, a powerful fleet led by Francis Nicholson set sail for Port Royal, the heart of French Acadia. The city had long been a bastion of French power in the region, supplying their allies with weapons and resources. Jonathan, despite his age, joined the English invasion force. He knew that victory here could change the course of the war. For days, English cannons battered the walls of Port Royal. The French, under Governor Daniel d'Aguer de Subercase, fought fiercely but could not withstand the onslaught. At last, the fortress fell to the English, marking the beginning of British control over Acadia. In the south, the English and their Cherokee allies launched attacks against the Spanish and their Muskogee Creek warriors, resulting in heavy casualties on both sides. The war had become a nightmare for all involved. The constant bloodshed drained resources and weakened all factions, leaving them vulnerable to future conflicts. By 1713, after over a decade of bloodshed, the Treaty of Utrecht was signed. The war had reshaped North America. The English had taken Acadia, Nova Scotia, while the French and Spanish retained much of their influence. But peace was fragile, and tensions between European empires and the native nations remained unresolved. Jonathan, now an old man, returned home. He had fought in 2 wars, seen countless lives lost, and had rescued his nephew Nathaniel from captivity in a daring mission deep into French territory. As he sat in his rocking chair, staring out at the vast forests of New England, he wondered, was it all worth it? He knew one thing for certain: war was never truly over. It simply waited. Final thoughts. Queen Anne's War was a brutal and transformative conflict that reshaped colonial North America. It was a war of empire, but also of survival for the settlers and indigenous nations caught in the crossfire. The seeds of future wars, including the French and Indian War, were sown during these battles. Though often overshadowed by later conflicts, Queen Anne's War was a defining moment in the struggle for the New World. Jonathan stood at the city's entrance, watching as the French lowered their flag. He felt no joy, only exhaustion. He had fought for his people, but he knew the war was far from over. In the aftermath of the victory, French settlers were given the choice to swear allegiance to the British crown or leave. Many resisted, and their defiance foreshadowed further tensions that would erupt in future wars. Chapter 5: The Final Battles. In the final years of the war, 1711 saw a failed British invasion of Quebec. The campaign, led by Admiral Hovenden Walker, ended in disaster as 7 ships sank in the icy waters of the St. Lawrence River. The dream of capturing New France had vanished beneath the waves. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a part of our community. Here, you will find historical wars, inspiring stories, and unique content based on real events. If you want to see more engaging and fact-based stories, hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest videos instantly. Your support means the world to us. Leave a comment and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next. Raising hands fire. Bell, subscribe, share, and help us bring these incredible stories to the world.